He was raised in Montana outdoor culture, in our town, and in our Catholic parish, by parents who cherish their faith and all of the inhabitants and elements of the natural world. Each of these things continues to be a significant influence on his ideas, values, and passions as an emergency room physician, entrepreneur, innovator, and healer of both biological and sociological systems. He had high praise for St. Mary's and our individual and communal efforts to combat the impact of climate change, including such things as our solar panels, Jubilee Garden, recycling, efforts to reduce the use of paper and plastic, LED lights, fair trade coffee, locally sourced flour for our Eucharistic bread, and prayers and educational opportunities, including book studies, bulletin articles, a web page on the parish website, and presentations. Pretty impressive, right? But Larry took all of this to the next level as he described his innovative approach, which, while validating individual efforts, focuses on building collective positive capacity and systemic change. He's going to tell us what that means here in a few minutes, I think. Currently, Larry is combining his personal and professional experiences to apply his approach to energize Montanans, inside and outside of the Catholic Church, to follow and amplify the call of Pope Francis, described in Laudato Si. This will strengthen the impact we are able to make as we combat the climate crisis and work to protect and care for God's creation, which is our common home. We can do this not so much by working harder, but by working differently. As a person who sometimes wonders if the efforts I am making to live simply and sustainably make any difference at all, who knows how serious the climate crisis is and that we are running out of time, I was filled with excitement and hope as I listened to Larry. Larry is the founder of an organization called Epidemic Leadership and the author of a book by the same title, which explains his approach, and he is here tonight to share it with us. Join me in welcoming Larry McEvoy. And here's the book.
Thanks, Andy. Whoop.
Push that.
You guys hear me?
How you been?
Loud enough? I have a big loud voice, so if I get to you in the back room, just let me know. Hello. One of the first rules of public speaking is to know your audience, and there's a lot I do not know about you. So I'm going to ask a few questions first. Another rule of public speaking is to make sure that you're accurate. We blow that one up in America these days. We say all sorts of things that aren't accurate and get away with it. But my brother Steve wanted you to know that when Barb Keegan was talking about this before Mass, I was notified, or I was sort of denoted as the son of Carol and Larry, and he leaned over and said, "You're a son of Carol and Larry." So I just wanted to be really clear about that. I told him I had sent in the best and only one worth listening to, and they crossed that out, so I thought that was progress. But anyway, here we are. So in getting to know you before I blab on, because I do have 4 sons, and they're like, "Dad, who the heck would listen to you?" Right? You get about 30 seconds and move on, Dad. And Sandy said, what, we have 5 hours here tonight before we go down?
At least.
Yeah, at least 5 hours. So I guess the question I would have for you is, how many of you are really actively enthusiastic about what's in Laudato Si and this idea of creation care teams, sustainable ministry, whatever that is? Raise your hands. Just like big fans, right? Yeah. Okay, great. How many of you are like sort of curious but not really in the pool yet? Who's that? Okay, great, perfect, glad you're here. How many of you are like I don't know. Boring speaker, free food. I don't know what this is about, but I'm here. Who's that? Is that anybody? And are there any cynics out there that think nothing real is going on? This isn't very relevant. I'm just here to sort of lob fruit at my head. Anybody like that out there? Okay. So we have the enthusiastic and the curious. It's good to know. Second question is this. And actually, I'm going to give you 30 seconds at your table to discuss this. At your table, come up with 1 or 2 words that would characterize your response to Laudato Si, right? Like, how would you characterize it? Earth-shattering, mildly interesting, doctrinal, boring, bureaucratic, not realistic, whatever you think of Laudato Si, the document at your table. You get 30 seconds, I'm going to see what you come up with. Go ahead. You can keep eating while you do this. Why does this thing keep going off? When a microphone turns off when you're speaking, that's an ominous sign to the speaker that you're already talking too much. So let's go table by table. Give me a word or two. Laudato Si, your response to it is what?
Inspiring and responsible.
Inspiring and responsible. Great.
Responsibility.
Responsibility. Got it. How about over here?
Excitement and relief.
What was the first one?
Excitement and
Excitement and relief.
Acknowledgement.
Acknowledgement, yeah. Excitement and relief, by the way, from a young person, my niece. We'll talk about young people in Laudato Si, plenty of that. How about you guys?
Still relevant after all these years.
Still relevant after all these years. Yeah. So it's back to the song by Orleans, right? What else?
Necessary.
Necessary, yes. How about you?
informative.
Informative.
Eye-opening.
Eye-opening. Go ahead.
Critical.
Critical. Hopeful. Stewardship. Critical too. Too critical. Good stuff. Someone else has wandered up into the speaker's podium. This is always good too. So, how many of you read the document, cover to cover? How many of you haven't read it at all? Good. Don't worry about it. No wrong answers here, all right? I'd encourage you to read it if you haven't. Don't read it quickly, right? Read it a little bit at a time. I've read it about 19 times, but I've never read it cover to cover. It's just there's too much in it. I think the relevant thing about the document is which is not where I want to spend my time tonight, is this. The word I would pick is radical, or I would say positively radical, because there's a lot of negatively radical out there. Francis has laid out something that is absolutely 100% traditional, straight down the pike, been there since Genesis, Catholic, right? There's nothing in there, in one sense, that's new. It's about stewardship. It's about multiplying gifts. It's about being reverent to the Creator, to God, to Jesus, to the Holy Spirit. It's about letting gifts move through us. It's about abundance. It's about thinking about how God's love imbues everything that we do and everything in the created universe. There's literally nothing new there in that sense. And he spends quite a bit of time in the foreword anchoring what he's about to say in Scripture, in church tradition, and literally to previous popes. Benedict, John Paul II, Pope Paul VI, I think he even quotes John the 23rd. So if you're thinking this is a fringe document, he makes very clear early, no. This is central to Catholicism over the centuries, and then this is where the radical part comes in. He says we're at a time in the inflection of the church's arc and the inflection of the planet's arc that requires a solution beyond something we've ever done before. And it's not a document to church hierarchy. It's not even a document just to Catholics. I don't know how many of you follow this stuff, but Laudato Si is actually a blueprint for other mainstream religions, non-Christian religions, for how to systematize sustainability, environmental stewardship, and linking the care of the poor and the care of the planet together. That's how wide-reaching it is. And he literally says, I think in page 1 or 2, I'm calling on, or I'm inviting every human on this planet, not some of us, every single person, into a dialogue about this. He goes on to use the word dialogue, by the way, about 400 times. And you think, does this guy not have a good editor? And is he not what he's doing? And this, well-educated Jesuit guy has probably got 5 degrees. And why does he keep using the word dialogue? Because he also points out 2 things. 1, we don't know how to do this yet. And 2, that it's going to take an absolute positive upheaval of all of the things that we hold entrenched in our societal systems, which have plenty of good in them, but have caused a lot of damage, and that will not be easy. He's very, very clear about this. Did you all remember when Francis came to the U.S.? Did you follow that visit at all? Do you remember when he went to Congress and, you know, right side of the aisle, left side of the aisle, blue, red, they all stood up and clapped for him when he was in all his papal garb and white and gold and everything? Do you remember what he did after that? Anybody?
He went to the top of the Capitol.
He went to the top of the Capitol. After that, where did he go? I think it was in Philadelphia. He went to a homeless shelter. You remember that? Didn't get quite the same coverage, but he went to a homeless shelter, and the security teams were like crazy. Like, what are you doing, right? This is not good. And he's like, don't worry about it. So he goes to the homeless shelter, and he sits down, and there's beautiful film of, to me, what Catholicism is all about. Because here is this high power, with high power clapping at him, and he walks in and he sits with these normal Philadelphians, poor, probably some of them had mental illness, and he spends about, I don't know, an hour or two, too long for his security team's comfort, just chatting, right? So one of the points that Francis makes throughout the encyclical is similar to one Father Tim made in his homily, right? Trust the Lord. Walk this way. What he shatters is that the way we think we're walking right now is not going to cut it anymore. That's the end of my fire and brimstone. Read the document. You'll find that it's everything we've always said. And then he's saying we have to understand we can't really care for the poor unless we recognize that the way we've dealt with the earth's resources has fractionated that into haves and have-not, and that the planet itself, given our population, our technology, the way that we've done things, is literally at risk. He doesn't argue about that, by the way. He stipulates that off there. If you want to go find that data, it's abundant. It's overwhelming. It's beyond dispute, right? But if you need that stuff, it's out there. So why am I here tonight? I am, like all of you, no one of consequence in one sense. I don't have a big Twitter following. I don't have billions of dollars. Not many people know me. I wrote a book that maybe 2 people had read, Mom and Dad. And Sandy says I have this approach. I have this approach because I'm an emergency physician. And I don't know, do any of you work in ERs? Any of you been to an ER? Was it a fun time? No. So this is the thing. My job was to get up every day, night, weekends, weird hours, and wait for bad things to happen to people that they didn't expect to happen to them, and they would come see me and my teammates. And when you do that for a while, you realize a couple of things. A, there's a lot of chaos out there. B, we produce so much more unhealth than we can possibly handle. I don't care how good you are as an ER doc, this is where my book starts, by the way, or an ER team, or an ER department, or a legion of ED people around the world. As good as we are, we're dealing with Humpty Dumpty here, and you cannot put it back together. It's ridiculous, right? I'll leave that aside too. The other thing that you realize as an emergency physician is that if we don't get upstream on this stuff, we're going to be just catching chasing the tail the whole time. So my career, the part where it gets funky that Sandy wanted me to talk to you about a little bit, has been going into messed up environments, human and otherwise, where people didn't think they'd get any better, and they told me that. I'd show up there like, look, don't even try, dude. This is so messed up. It's just been this way for a long time. Don't try. And those environments got bigger and bigger because I'm not real bright. I kept raising my hand and talking and thinking we'd do something about this. And the first time I was in one of these environments, everything did turn around after about 3 years. We made more money, our scores changed, people got happier, people started coming to us. We went from terrible to wonderful. And no one of us really knew what we were doing. It was kind of an accident. We're like, well, that's fun, but could you actually do that again? Or was that just sort of, Jerry LaShares here, was that a lottery? Was that God's grace? Like, what happened? We didn't really know. We were young and we tried hard, and we wanted to be good, and we got lucky. But I got really interested in, can you take a really big problem and climate and economic and political and faith and neighborhood and educational systems being stable what they are, taking us in the wrong direction, having to change, is the biggest problem, the biggest possible problem. Let's add one more variable. We are out of time. I've been worrying about this since I was, 10, 9, 11? And my mom and dad, good Catholics. Don't worry, Larry, you have good institutions. We have good leaders. People will do the right thing. I lived and died by that as an ER doc, a department chair, as a CEO of the largest trauma center in Colorado. Doesn't work. I'm not saying that we should go to war, be violent, or be anti-Catholic, but if there's a time for our Catholicism to become exponential in its impact, not you 25 hours a day, not your family giving everything away and just being destitute, no. But if there's a time for us to become abundant in our impact, it is now. And the question is how? I'm going to read you a quote from a scientist. Anybody know a guy named Gus Speth? I'd never heard of him either. He's a scientist. He started some wacky organization called the Natural Resources Defense Council. And he says this. I'm old, I've got to take off my glasses here. He said this 10 years ago. I used to think that the top global environmental problems were biodiversity loss, which by the way is happening radically, ecosystem collapse, also happening, and climate change, yes. I thought that with 30 years of good science, we could address these problems, but I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a spiritual and a cultural transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that. So who does? And how do we do it? I called Sandy because I love Montana. Do you guys like living here? It's a beautiful place, yeah? Is there anything better than spring in Montana when the smoke from Alberta is not rolling down here? Which shouldn't happen, by the way, right? Who's been here since 1980? In 1980, do you see smoke rolling down here from Alberta in May? It did not happen. Does it mean that it's coming in May now that the climate is warming? No. Nature's like that. Biology's like that. It has random events, it has mutations, it has weird things. Unfortunately, the things that could be random are no longer random. They're here all the time. So, what I want to think about, or the reason I called Sandy, is that as I came back to Montana, I discovered that the state I had to leave for a while to work was not getting healthier, it's getting worse. Do you know how many people died of overdoses in this country last year? 110,000. Do you know how many people died in the Vietnam War? 58, roughly, plus or minus, right? We can argue about when it started and who was who and all that sort of stuff. That happens all the time now. We're living in a world that has literally normalized damage. And that's something for us to think about. How do we get there? What should we do about it? Where do we go forward? But the point that Gus Speth is making is if we're going to go forward, it's not the science that's going to do it. It's not the politicians that are going to do it. We have the science, guys. I mean, I could geek out forever the rest of the night and put you all to sleep on the neuroscience of human behavior and the network science of what moves people and the biological science of what's going on the planet, and you're going to get nowhere. In fact, half the people in this state, at least, will argue with me that I'm wrong and wacko and some kind of woke leftist. I'm not a leftist, by the way. Right? So, what do we do? I have to tell you, I showed up at a job 15 years ago in the middle of a recession, and big companies were going out of business, and we were losing money, and everyone was panicked, and everyone told me we'd never get anywhere, several thousand people. And I thought, where do we turn? Because I had a big megaphone, I had a big parking spot, right? I had the top box in the org chart. I was a dude, I was somebody. I was not little Larry from Montana out in the woods with my brother the chainsaw, which is where I prefer to be, by the way. Everyone's like, you gotta fix this, right? There's no fixing these big things alone. So the reason I called Sandy is that you guys are already on the verge of doing something amazing. I shouldn't say that. You're already doing something amazing. You're on the verge of doing something amazing and exponential. How many pounds of food did you give away last year to the food bank?
5,200 pounds.
How many?
5,200 pounds.
5,200 pounds. And were you giving away industrialized, salty, high-fat SpaghettiOs? No. You're giving away the kind of food that poor people need the most. High nutrition, low calorie density, right? The food industry makes food that's high calorie and low nutrition dense. Why do they do that? They're a business. They're trying to make a profit. And it's easier to eat high calorie food and low nutrition food. It's easier to sell that than it is to make high nutrition food that's low calorie dense. Who changes that? Any of you guys write the food companies? Can you please make healthy foods for us? Can you please build it organically? Can you please be ethical? Has anyone tried that? Why not? Are you lazy? You don't care? Why don't we do this? It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And I can tell you, I've had this conversation. This is where Francis is very, very, very emphatic. The link between social justice for anybody, black, white, brown, tall, short, rich, poor, Asia, Africa, US, it doesn't matter. Not that Africa, Asia, and US are all continents or countries, is always the same. The exploitation of people and the exploitation of land are always the same, if you dig right down to it. I've been in the Rhino refugee camp in northern Uganda. I don't know if you guys, anyone been to Uganda? It's right next to the Sudan. The Sudan is always at war. They're at war again, right? And the South Sudan's at war. And so refugees come piling out of there. There's 500,000 people in that place with nowhere to go. The stories they have to tell you are unbelievable, by the way. And I'm going to have this conversation with them right now, and they're like, look, we care. We care about our kids. We care about our grandkids. We care about our land. What can we do? We're small, they're big. And so the challenge for what you're doing here, the 5,200 pounds of food and all the things Sandy rattled off that so inspired me, is that we have, I don't know how many parishes in this state. Somebody knows, like 115, I don't know. We have 2 dioceses. And if you look at what happened, this is the 8th anniversary of Laudato Si, a document that the hierarchical church, right, the direct descendant of Jesus through Peter said, hey, this is a big, big deal. And I'm not going to play the power card. I'm not going to say, do it my way. I'm going to say all over the world, we have to start talking about this. And we have to start talking about it with respect to the poor. We have to start talking about it with respect to spirituality. We have to talk about it with respect to communities. And we have to get into all of our systems, media, politics, education, economics, faith communities, neighborhoods, or we are not going to do anything about this. And he's almost faithfully desperate in his tone. It's the most emphatic papal document I've ever read. Do you guys read a lot of papal documents? I don't, but the ones I read seem a little churchy to me, right? They're like a lot of sort of ecclesiastical doctrinal language. He's very, very earthy. He's like, look, we gotta move. So how do a bunch of people who care, and again, having grown up in this parish, I know that we do. I grew up in this state, I know that we do. And yet here we sit. Every year goes by and we burn. Every year goes by and the wealth gaps get bigger. Every year goes by and the oceans get a little bit warmer. Part of this is a literacy thing, right? I can tell you as a scientist, a biological scientist, a medical scientist, one of the haunting things about being an ER doctor is that when you're going to work and people are taking that left turn in to see you that they didn't expect, whether they're aorta tore or they cut their thumb making salsa or their belly hurts, they have a headache, is they have no clue the deep water they're over. No clue. And one of our tasks is, how do we help people understand what the risk is here without frightening them? Another point Francis makes, which is, look, we can't do this by being afraid. This is back to Father Tim's trust the Lord thing. This has to be an act of faith, an act of creative joy, an act of creating community, and an act of inclusiveness. I don't know how many people are in this room, but at St. Thomas, I'm in Billings, we had a little ministry sign-up thing last year, and only 2 people that came out by our table had even heard of Laudato Si. Even heard of it. They're Catholics, for Pete's sakes. There's a study from Creighton University that will tell you in the year before Laudato Si and the 4 years afterwards, they tracked 171 of the 176 or 178 U.S. dioceses. So most of them, I don't know how the others got off the hook. They looked at every formal communication from bishops to laity. And climate change, Laudato Si, or doing something about it was mentioned in less than 12 out of 12,000. It's huge how little we've said about this in a formal way. So in the middle of all this, I come back to Montana, I see what's going on. I know my mom says, oh, we have a garden, talk to Sandy. I call Sandy up and, well, here's this huge list that she went over, right? And my question to her was, hey, what are you doing to go deeper, wider, faster, easier? Because if we ask you to act like an ER doctor and get on roller skates and try to patch things up at the back end by yourself, those of you that will try will fail. And you will fail and wear out. And what Francis says is we've got to find a way to community this, to come together so that we're effective. We're figuring things out as we go, because no one's ever done this before, guys. 500 years ago, you whacked down a few trees, polluted an ocean, assassinated a few indigenous people, enslaved some black people from West Africa. Violent stuff, but it didn't tilt the axis of the planet. And the scientists now call the era we're living in the Anthropocene. It's a hard word to say, you have to practice in front of the mirror. Anthropocene. It means that humans are defining how the whole thing works. We're back to the Garden of Eden here. We've been given everything. And God said, just fit in, enjoy it, just trust me. Father Tim again. And we said, no, we think we'll decide. We'll decide. And we'll decide to take, and we'll treat it like it's ours. Francis goes into this about dominion too. It's a great 3 or 4 paragraphs about what dominion really means. God's domain, we are free to move freely in it as long as we're in right relationship with God. The idea of fracturing that relationship and taking it all, never on the table. And that's what we have been doing. So, in my little professional journey, whereas no one of consequence, big box, big megaphone, big parking space or not, and usually not, I had to think, how do you get thousands of people moving? You guys already have many people moving. Father Tim, how many people are in this parish? Just roughly.
500 families.
500 families, right? So the question I asked Sandy was, of the, well, let's say there's 55 people in the room tonight. How do 55 people get to 500 families? How do 500 families get to every family, every Catholic family in this town and in this diocese? And how does every Catholic community in every town in Montana get to our brothers and sisters who are Lutherans, who are Methodists, who are evangelicals, who are Buddhists, who are atheists? Because that is what's happening around the world. People are flocking to Rome to talk to Pope Francis, and they're not even Catholic. 200-300 big businesses every year go to Rome to talk to him about what they can do. Because they're having the same conversation you are in a way. They realize on the planetary stage, they're tiny, but they're serious. So they're just blowing off their governments and showing up in Rome. If this doesn't establish the Catholic Church as an unbelievable framer of a better century, I don't know what does. I mean, this is the kind of stuff you read in grade school, right? Where like emperors went off to Rome to get the Pope's absolutions or whatever else. This looks a little healthier to me, but it's going on. So in my work, what I figured out when I got really frustrated that my 25 hours a day and getting no sleep and missing my kids' games and missing holidays at home being an ER doc wasn't going to work, I had to ask myself, what does work? Which is why I wrote this book called Epidemic Leadership. Because remember that thing, the virus, the pandemic that gave us such a hassle? That thing started with no money, no Twitter following, no campaign endorsements, no business plan, no passport, no airplane, nothing. And it got all over the world against our personal immune systems, which are significant. They're built to kick out anything foreign. Just overwhelmed them. And overwhelmed all of our societal things and kept us without toilet paper and hamburgers for a while as well. And it got us all fighting. So I think there's a way for you all to get deeper. And if we had a day to do a workshop on this, we could do this. What does deeper mean for each of you? Your way. Francis is emphatic about this as well. This must be a volitional commitment to choose to act, to discern, to follow. All of the things we Catholics talk about. He's not going to push. He said there's no compliant, pushing, dictatorial solution that will work here. This is a walk of faith together. So epidemics have a way of infecting people. They get in and they cause something called conversion, which coincidentally is the same word Francis is asking us all to undergo. He says this is an individual and a societal conversional journey. And as the leader of Catholics all over the world, he says, frankly, we're going to have to figure this out. So the thing about infection is once it gets in you, if you have a strong conversion, you've seen a lot of this disease, right? And your body's ready for it. If you have a weak conversion, it went in and bounced off and you maybe built a few antibodies. So I think there's a way to think about how to design deeper conversion in each of you and in this parish in a way that's very, very life-giving. So you heard my niece say, what was the 2 words you said about this document?
Exciting and relief.
Exciting and relief. Just tell me why relief, real quick.
Well, it was a table conversation and people were mentioning how they appreciated it finally being addressed.
Yeah, can you hear this? Finally, if you're a young person right now, is the church gaining or losing young people? Yeah, in droves. I see stats like 4 out of 5 Catholics that go from high school to college leave in their first year of college, right? Many of them come back. But if there's something that's going to drive young people away, all over the world right now, because I've had this conversation with enough of them to trust it, it's don't talk about this. Just pretend everything's fine, pat them on the head and tell them it'll be good. You start becoming a church where you're linking the reverence of the Creator with the arc of Jesus' life. Birth, life, death, including suffering, necessarily suffering, resurrection and renewal, with what's going on in our environment and our societies, they're in. They are annoyed if you are not having this conversation. I love St. Mary, but when I come here, is it full of young people and a few old people like me tottering around? No. We're losing our young people. This is a way to get them back, right? So I think there's an infectious component that viruses have down and in that is applicable to how you continue this great work you're doing. And then there's a part I'm really fascinated with which I call contagion. If I get sick and my immune system seroconverts, it helps me clear the infection and it helps me look for it again and again. I'm forever immune, so to speak, right? I'm converted. But while I'm sick, if I cough on my mom or my brother or any of you, I have a chance via contagion of getting you sick as well. And we're not doing this very well as a U.S. church yet. I've got a friend of mine, she's a retired University of Georgia biologist. Her name's Susan Varlamov. Now it says red. Does this mean I'm done? You're done. My brother said I'm done. Oh! It said red.
It
Okay,
comes
says
and
red.
goes,
I got limited time here. I guess it's not 5 hours. When Laudato Si came out, she and some other Catholics in her parish went. Is this off? On? It's off. Okay. I'll be louder. They went to now Cardinal Wilton Gregory, right? He's in D.C. I think he has problems with me. Sorry. And he was the Archbishop of Atlanta, the Archdiocese of Atlanta. And they went to him and they said, Archbishop, will you please say something about this? And he looked at them and he said, I'll do you one better. Get me an action plan, and we will make this archdiocese absolutely the beacon of what should happen here. So I called her up. It's a wonderful thing these days, right? You can Google people, you can find them on LinkedIn, you can call them up, and if they know you're a wacko, they don't talk to you, but if they don't know that, they will. So I get on a conversation with her, and that archdiocese is doing unbelievable things. So parishes have cut their operating energy costs in half or more. And she said, we approached some parish councils with, look, need more money? Every parish does, right? Father Tim, are we just awash in money richer than the Vatican? Yeah. No, we're not, right? So you always need more money, because if churches have money, they can do good things with it. I'd rather the churches have more money than some big industrial thing, right? They're making plenty of money. Churches need money. Cut your operating costs in half, it's a good thing. So they do energy audits, they're all in gardens, they got youth ministries going on. They do such a good job that two things have happened that I want to throw out there that we could do in Montana. One is other churches are like, hey, what the heck? Will you guys show us, right? Again, black churches, white churches, poor churches, rich churches, evangelical churches, everybody. The whole place is seething, and it's literally linking up to the Atlanta metro area sustainability efforts. So Archbishop Gregory, they wrote an action plan, by the way, which our bishop in the East, Bishop Fleming, will have pressed into his flesh next week. He doesn't know this yet, but it's going to land in his hands during your high school graduation, because my kid's going to put it there, Jason Bourne style, right? So we're one of the, by the way, this state, Montana, plus North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Idaho, that thing, you know how many bishop communications were in that Creighton study? Zero, right? So we have to start thinking like the Archdiocese of Atlanta, epidemically. Cardinal Gregory's already on speed dial minus to come talk to the priests and the bishops in these dioceses saying, hey, here's our story. He opened up either the Catholic or the Religious Climate Conference earlier this year. There's a YouTube on that. It's not even out on YouTube channels. They'll only send it to, within these church channels. So there are people out there that can help us. But what you guys are doing down at St. Thomas, when we got people together, remember last fall, only 2 of them knew what Laudato Si was. Our priest, Father Steve's wonderfully supportive, wants to start small. That's typical. Catholics are kind of conservative. Time to not be conservative here anymore. Not politically conservative. This is not let's try a little bit for 50 years and see what happens, right? We got farmers to think about, right? We prayed about them today. We got streams to think about. We got poor people to think about. We got economies to think about. We got nutrition to think about. And Americans, I can tell you this as a doctor, we are not healthy. We're rich. As a people, we're rich. We're not healthy. The rest of the world is not healthy and not rich, and their land is trashed too. If you don't think our land is trashed, only 2% of Native American grassland is left. small portion of American timber is left. We keep growing trees, right? We're living actually on a pretty trashed environment that's getting pretty tippy. The good news is it will come back. Anyone been out to my brother Steve's place, by the way, in the valley? Yeah, it's a good trip for you, right? Because he bought a 40 acres of just trash land about, how long ago?
Oh, 6, something.
Right, so 15 years ago, 14, 17 years ago. And it's amazing now. It's more productive economically. It's much more biodiverse. It's a great place to be. If you went there the first time and you didn't know my brother, you'd be like, what did you waste your money on, buddy? This is like a just hard pan, desiccated, terrible part of Montana. We did the same thing down west of town in Billings. We bought some land 25 years ago and people told us this is terrible. You shouldn't have spent your money. Now it's got streams on it. It's got wildlife all over the place. Kids come out and get excited about it. So there are ways to do this. And what you all are doing for our parish in St. Thomas is nothing short of eye-popping. We're at the very beginning. 2 weeks ago, we had 10 people in a room. Last week, we had 19. This week, we're going to try to double that to get to 38. So we're looking at you. And so my invitation to you, my gratitude to you, my challenge to you is go deeper. Pull out all the stops. Get on the radio. Get the people from the cathedral over here. Get out to the valley. Bring them here. Because the way epidemics work is not to have one big center of illness drop on people. Terrorists like that idea, right? They like to put something in a little bomb on a subway and go, pfft. That's not how epidemics work. They go person to person to person to person to person, and they require a lot of hits. So every time you talk to somebody about this, do you have lunch, Father Tim, with other priests here? They get together, right? Get in that space, right? Either load Father Tim with what to say. If he's not ready, doesn't believe it, get him out to my brother Steve's place, walk him in the garden, have him read the encyclical, whatever it takes, right? Francis is emphatic about this. Don't badger, but continually convene. Loving, yes. Insistent, also yes, right? But the priests get together. The bishops get together. You all get together. Council of Catholic Women, Knights of Columbus, right? Gardeners. Think of your purchasing power. 500 families spends how much money in this town every day? A lot, right? You go to restaurants. You can go to restaurants and say, hey, get rid of the styrofoam. How about cardboard recycling, right? One of us does that. They're like, yeah, whatever, too busy. I've tried it in Billings, by the way, right? I'm like, hey, why do you use the styrofoam? Oh, it's cheaper, right? Do you ever look at anything else? No. If we said that cardboard was cheaper, would you use it? Oh, yeah. Would you make that phone call? No, I'm too busy, right? But if a bunch of parishes got together and said, hey, look, restaurants, here's what we want to see. And we spend a lot of money. Here's how much money we do spend. It's a large amount. Now you can start swinging things. The thing that business caters to most is the consumer. The thing they fear most is the consumer. It's time for us to start thinking like stewardship consumers, like faithful consumers, like abundant loaves and fishes, mustard seed, we're going to actually make this go consumers. We're too timid. The virus was not timid on us, people, was it? It just strafed us. If it was a football game or an NBA game or a soccer game, it's a joke what that thing did to us. It's a Twinkie. It's a little bit of genetic material wrapped with protein. That's all it is. Doesn't even have brain. We have big brains, and we got slaughtered by that thing because it has an unbelievable hit rate. It basically functions like evangelization is supposed to. Hit, 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 hit. And every time it hits, it has a chance of making something sticky happen. And then it gets into places where a lot of people are there. Remember this in the virus or the pandemic? Hockey locker rooms, church choirs, they got sick early. Because whenever you can get people gathered 2 or more in their name, they're in business. And we can start doing that this way. You guys are, as far as I can tell, the most inspiring Catholic community in this state on this issue. And as a friend of mine says, who's not a practicing Christian, we are late, 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 late. She's right. She doesn't know what to do about it. She's not part of a faith community. I go to Uganda and I talk to these people. So I've done some work in a slum in Uganda, great people. And the first time that I went there, it's an old brickyard. It's just nothing but packed dirt, sun searing its equatorial, right down all day, every day, 12 hours a day because it's on the equator. And we're talking to these people. There's trash all over the place, by the way. If you go, any of you guys been to the third world, the developing world? Poverty and trash are the same thing. They are the same thing. And they're not an accident. So in Uganda, there's 80% unemployment. There's a government that's nominally democracy, but it's a democracy with guns, and those guns are everywhere. And the people don't dare move because those guns have hurt them. Going back to Idi Amin and civil wars, they all have stories of people they've seen shot in front of them or macheted in front of them, including their friends and relatives. They live like that. So here they are in this place trying to get educated. They're very poor, and there's trash everywhere. And I'm like, so what's going on at school? They're like, well, we're trying to get our education. 2 + 2 is 4. They drill these kids over and over again. Lifeless place, right? And these kids are amazing. I asked them what their dream is. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a pastor. One of them want to be an HR executive, which I thought was really interesting because, man, at that age, I didn't know what an HR executive was. So we had a little conversation with them and the woman who had started this school about what they really wanted out of life and what was stopping them and what they really wanted to do in their school. And we challenged them to think about this idea of creating things and to link that to their faith. God as a creator, we are created in God's image, we have to create things. And 24 months later, that school has no trash on it. It's about a 2-acre thing, right? Outside, it's trash. It's literally baby goats and chickens and 2-year-olds foraging in garbage. And I got the pictures if you don't believe it. And that's just like a common everyday thing. In the schoolyard now, mangoes, avocados, everything is planted. The kids take care of it. There are butterflies and birds flying in. The government now is coming to that school, and so are business leaders going, what are you doing here? Because the school now is thinking about not just a pretty place. They're thinking about creating a generation of sustainable innovators to jumpstart a whole economy. Should they have to do that? I think the government should be doing that. But the government instead is mining their national parks by selling oil and gas leases to the Chinese, who give them crap debt. You can find out all about this later. And they're just literally raping their country, and the government's helping them with it. It's tragic. I went there one year, and there's this nice little road snaking through the jungle, and you see all these things like Abyssinian ground hornbills and crazy things you don't see anywhere else that you can't even imagine. And you see elephants like right next to vehicles. And the next year, the Chinese have a road in there, I'm not kidding you, 100 feet wide, and the elephants are hiding behind the tree 100 yards or half a mile out, because they know who we are. But in the middle of all that, there's this school, and these kids are doing amazing things, and now people are coming to them. I asked them last year what their dream was. One 12-year-old girl stood up, no irony, no sarcasm, no pushback from any of her classmates. I'm going to be the president of Uganda. There's never been a woman president of Uganda. 12-year-olds from the slums do not become presidents of Uganda. That's what they think they're going to do. And they're right. And I tell them all over the world, they'd say, oh, Dr. Larry, it's so good you're here. Uganda's the most beautiful place in the world. And I laugh and I say, you guys, I see people all over the world and everyone thinks they live in a beautiful place. So you're right, Uganda is beautiful. I come from a beautiful place too. We think it's the most beautiful place in the world. But you tell me, why is Uganda beautiful? And they're like, well, look at it. I said, what do you know about Uganda? They say, what do you know about Uganda? I said, well, I did some research. I said, do you know what percentage of your country is forested? They're like, no. I said, okay, let me just take you back to 1970, before any of you were born, right? When I was a little kid. What percentage of your country was forested then? They're like, I don't know, 50, 80? I said, it's 59%. That's probably after 75 years of logging, by the way. It's probably a 70-30 place. I said, what do you think guys think it is now? 45, 50, 40, 30? First time I went there, Uganda was 9% forested. And the trucks and the saws are going. They're not giving the jobs to Ugandans except with a chainsaw. They take all that wood, the Chinese or the Russians or whoever else take all the money, they give Ugandans a job that's enough to survive, and they say cut it down some more. And it's not enough of a job to start a business, and it's not enough of a job to get out, and it's not that they have an economy where they can walk away from that. So they're trapped, and they don't realize it, but when they do, they are not happy. The question to me was, who took our trees? I said, I think you guys should ask that question. It's devastating what's happening on this planet, and it's not you or me necessarily, but we can't sit in our pews anymore and say, okay, that's all right. 5,200 pounds of food is a huge deal. Trust me, I'm going to have you guys on TV talking to our people. They're like, oh, garden, will it really make a difference? Yeah, 5,200 pounds of food to the poor in this town is a huge deal. Got to make it work. So, as you can tell, I'll go on about this for a long time. I want to say a couple things. One, thank you. Because in other parishes in the state, we are not even started. We need more people going. We need more projects. We need more priests. We need more bishops. We need more airtime. We need more money. We need more businesses, everything, right? Literally, Our young people are waiting. Our grandchildren are waiting. God is asking us, move please. And you guys are doing it, which is fantastic. So thank you. The ask I would have is, if you're interested in this, travel whatever route you have, right? Read the thing, come to the garden, rent a bed, get an idea, work on the web page. It doesn't matter what your skill set is. And if you're already way in, get together and start thinking, how can you go from the good things you're doing here to get all 500 families involved, all of them, and try to get how many parishes and faith communities in this town can you get rolling? Because this is happening around the globe. There's a guy who went to Rwanda. You remember Rwanda and the whole machete thing and the Tutsis and all that? Brutal, brutal thing, 1993, 94. He was from Brazil. He was a journalist, and his family had a bit of land in Brazil. Beautiful, beautiful country. Have any of you guys been to the rainforest of the world? Uncut rainforest? It is cathedral-esque. You cannot go in those things and be unimpressed. It takes about 2 million years to make a rainforest. They're loaded with all sorts of new drugs and compounds that fix cancer and make our clothes better and all that sort of stuff. The biodiversity there isn't even cataloged yet. And you go in there and it's extremely humbling. We take out about 10,000 acres a day, by the way. So this guy was lucky enough, his family had a bit of rainforest. And he went over to Rwanda and he spent 6 or 8 months there, first watching people hack each other to bits, which we humans are so good at, and then watching them begin to repair themselves. And Rwanda's actually done some interesting restorative justice work over the last 25 years. But he was watching all this, taking photos and writing articles, whatever he's doing, and he found it was really, really difficult on his psyche. How many of you guys, by the way, when you have a bad day, you go outside? Y'all do that?
Yeah.
I do. I mean, my dad asked me one time, how's your day? I'm like, I'm outside, Dad. I've never had a bad day outside. I've been cold, I've been windy, I've been hot. I've never had a bad day outside. But, by the way, that works scientifically. Whether you're an urban or a rural person, if you're outside, your stress hormones go down, your immune system gets better, your heart rate slows down, cortisol levels get better. There's a whole bunch of good things that happen. But anyway, this guy, feeling the need to get outside back in his homeland, left Rwanda after just a really, really difficult 6 or 8 months. And he came home, and what did he find? His family had chopped down all the trees for money. And so he came back, he's off to Rwanda watching people chop themselves up, and it got to be a bit too much, so he came back home to recover. And he goes out to his family's place, it's about 1,500 acres, I guess. And they chopped everything down. So he spent the next 3 or 4 years with his wife, and they replanted the whole place. And now, you can go find this on the internet, now it's a rainforest again. It's not a 2 million year rainforest, it's a secondary succession rainforest, but the biodiversity is back. He can go out there and be healthy again. It's not eroding anymore. So there's one thing I would tell you, the last thing I'll tell you as an ER doctor, I've seen a lot of damage, more than I hope any of you have had to see in your life, and it takes a toll. I've also seen really damaged things get better faster and easier than we think. But it does not happen by accident. It doesn't happen by us sitting there thinking someone else should worry about it. Is it really a problem? You got to get in and you got to go to work. You got to have more than a few people, and you got to be having fun. This is a pretty serious topic tonight, but my guess is when you're in the garden, you're having fun, yeah? It is, it's fun. This is really fun work. I do some rough stuff in my life. It's tough, right? And when I need to get better, I do one of two things. I get together with my people, right? Jerry LaShare and I used to play basketball at the Y. He was amazing when he was 25 years old. He's 15. So I get together with my people. That's what we all do all over the world, right? And I'm lucky. I got friends in Africa. I got friends in Montana. I got friends all over the world now. And they can pick me up when I'm just puddled. Or I go outside. And when I go outside, it's always a good thing. So I end this way. Thank you. Think about deeper, wider, faster, and don't stop. We really appreciate what you're doing. Thanks so much for having me. Good night.